I'm going to talk about fake news, the way that the establishment media deceive the public. And I'll just give an example before I get into this. I'll give one example that is very topical, which is the attack on Andy Ngo, the guy who goes around in Portland. Well, he does a number of things. One is he reports on hate crime hoaxes, and he also reports on Antifa in Portland. And he went to film them, and he got assaulted. And it's not really making the mainstream media. Let me just see if CNN has anything on this. Let's just go to CNN. Breaking news, live news. Let's look at U.S. news. U.S. edition. International Arabic Espanol. I just want U.S. edition. Okay. I don't know what I'm looking at here. Okay, I don't see anything here. I see gas taxes, woman indicted, Joe Biden's gay waiter, Taylor Swift, father shot, blah, blah, blah. Ivanka Trump, blah, blah, blah. Don't see anything on Portland, Antifa. I don't see anything on Andy Ngo. Let's try this U.S. tab. Let's see. Busy El Paso crossing. Father dies in hospital. Massive wasp nests. I don't see anything in here about Portland. I'm going to search for Portland. I'm sure it's got to have some coverage. And this is CNN. Let's try this. Portland. All right. 3 arrested and 8 injured as Portland protests turn violent. Notice the way they say that, right? Turn violent. It just happened, it was just passive. It just happened. They just turned violent. It's not like they went there intending to do violence, right? It's not like they went there prepared to commit acts of violence. It's not like the police allowed them to commit acts of violence. No, it just turned violent. It was just like something that just happened, right? Okay, so let's see. What do they say here? I should just read this. Yeah, I'm just going to read this. I think this is a good example, even though this is going to make it longer. It's worth doing this. I'm just going to read this, and then I'm going to use this as an example later when I go through the methods. Okay, so there you have a headline, and what they show as a picture is not Antifa smashing somebody in the head, but some Antifa guy just staring at a policeman who's staring back, and that's it. Okay? And they don't even mention Antifa anywhere in the headline or anything like that. It says, an unidentified protester and a police officer during a demonstration at Pioneer Courthouse. 3 people, that's the caption for the picture. All right, 3 people were arrested and 8 people injured, including at least 3 police officers, during violent demonstrations in Portland on Saturday, according to police. Multiple assaults were reported, police said, and items were thrown at demonstrators and officers that looked like milkshakes but contained quick-dry concrete. Items were thrown. Portland Fire and Rescue medics treated 8 people on the scene, authorities said, including 3 police officers. And by the way, the first thing you have to notice is I had to search to find this, right? This should be important news, but it's apparently not. Okay, so 2 officers were pepper sprayed, an officer was punched in the arm by a demonstrator, and an officer sustained a head injury from a projectile, police said. The injuries were not life-threatening. It really is ironic that Antifa are attacking the police who are protecting them, right? If the police weren't there, Antifa would get fucking annihilated. But the right-wingers are not willing to show up because they know the police are going to go against them if they do anything, right? So if the right-wingers show up prepared to defend themselves, the police will arrest them, or if they fight back, they will get arrested, right? It's just sickening. It's just anarcho-tyranny. But all right, anyway, all right. According to CNN Portland affiliates, blah, 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 clashing demonstrators included anti-fascist protesters and members of several right-wing groups, including the far-right group The Proud Boys. A website for the Rose City Antifa group earlier this month called on supporters to defend the city against the Proud Boys. A group of Antifa protesters marched to Pioneer Courthouse Square, where a smaller group of right-wing demonstrators had gathered. They reported that animosity between the groups was mostly verbal, but eventually police called it a civil disturbance and ordered people to leave. It's unclear which groups the arrested protesters were affiliated with. Demonstration events are very fluid in nature, and the management of these events is complex, said Assistant Chief Chris Davis. Unfortunately, today some community members and officers were injured. We are actively investigating these incidents to hold those responsible accountable. What a fucking joke, right? This is not only this is Clown World 1984, right? This is the Clown World version of 1984. I mean, this is a joke, right? There are videos of these assaults. They're not showing the videos of the assaults here, right? Okay, so now I'm going to talk about fake news. I'm going to go over the various ways that... Oh, and I wanted, before I get into this, okay, I forgot how I got started on this. I wanted to compare this Andy Ngo assault to the assault, the fake assault, the hoax, with Jussie Smollett. Because these events are very similar, right? There's a gay man of color and a gay man of color, right? So Jussie Smollett perpetrates a hoax, and he gets some black guys to pretend to be white guys and pretend to beat him up, and he gets a little scratch on his cheek, and apparently, there's a noose around his neck, and somebody throws bleach on him, and all this ridiculous nonsense, right? And there's no video of it, there's no direct evidence of it, and the media take it and run with it. Okay, they took it and run with it. Let me just get the Jussie Smollett reporting from CNN. Let me just look up Jussie Smollett. Sorry that this is so random, but... Alright, so let's see if I can find something that was published a while ago. How far back do we have to go here? It's got to be a while back. Okay, here's one, I guess, from CNN back in January. It says, this is from CNN, Empire actor Jussie Smollett was attacked in what Chicago police are calling a possible hate crime. One of Smollett's alleged attackers also put a rope around his neck, according to police, but investigators have not yet found images or video from security cameras of the incident. And this has a link to a CNN article. So this is the article that they put out there after this event. It says, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says Empire actor Jussie Smollett was attacked in the early morning hours on Tuesday in what Chicago police are calling a possible hate crime. Smollett was attacked by two people who were yelling out racial and homophobic slurs and poured an unknown chemical substance on the victim, police said. And they go on and on and on. And the headline is, Empire star Jussie Smollett attacked in possible hate crime. So notice the difference between how they reported on Jussie Smollett and their non-reporting on Andy Ngo. There's no mention of Andy Ngo in that article I just read. There's no mention of his name. There are no pictures of him. They're not humanizing the victims. They're not showing you pictures of the victims. They're not showing you guys with blood dripping down their faces. They're sanitizing it, right? So just notice the difference between the way they reported on the fake Jussie Smollett case and the way they're reporting now on this real Andy Ngo case, where there is video of it happening. You can clearly see it. Andy made a whole bunch of streams along the way, so you know what he was doing. He was not antagonizing them. He was not even talking to them. I mean, his antagonizing of them consisted of him filming them. So this is a good contrast to keep in mind. I'm not going to make this all about this event. I'm just using that as an example. All right, and now I'm going to go through all the different ways that the mainstream media, or the establishment media, that's probably a better term, the establishment media, lie to the public. The main way they do this is not by telling us direct lies, like direct falsehoods, but by selecting facts, images, interpretations, ways of presenting information, and many other things. So they lie by selection. Okay, the lie is in the filter. So you see some of reality through the filter. It is showing you a view of reality, but it is a highly selected view. It is not an unbiased view. It does not give you the information you need to know if you want to understand what is going on. It gives you information that is selected to fit the narrative. And the narrative comes first. Their ideological narrative comes first, and the data, the evidence, the news, are fit to the narrative. Okay? To the greatest extent possible, right? So the example of the attacks in Portland, the way they reported on it was like the way they could report on it that basically did the least damage to their narrative. They had to report on it. It was a huge event. It had a lot of significance, not just because a few people got hurt, but because it has bigger political significance. It's an event that symbolizes a lot of the things going on in the United States, a lot of the political struggles and issues. So it's actually a very newsworthy event, right? It's certainly just as newsworthy as Jussie Smollett getting attacked. Like, even if Jussie Smollett really did get attacked, this would be just as newsworthy as that. But you can see that they passed both events through an ideological filter to fit them to their ideological narrative, which is what comes first, right? The news comes last, the narrative comes first. And basically, the main way, and almost the only way, that the establishment media lie to us is with some version of the cherry-picking fallacy, where they select or filter information to make it fit a preconceived narrative or an ideological belief system, right? Like, they're filtering what they present to you, and that's the way they lie to you. All right. And I'm going to go through all the various ways they do this, just because it needs to be done. Somebody has to do this. Somebody has to go through and just list these things. Okay. So that they're there. I'm sure somebody else has done this, but I just felt like I needed to do this just for my own sake and also for anybody else's sake. And then once you have this list, you can go and look for yourself and find all kinds of examples of the media doing these things. So instead of just saying, look, they're misleading us, you can say, look, they're doing this. All right. Now, here's the list. I'll finally start reading what I have written here. But first I need to get some water. My mouth is dry, so give me a sec. All right, I'm back. I know, it was super fast for you because I stopped recording. Okay, so here we go. The first way that the media deceive us, and one of the most important, is by presenting facts or statistics that support one view while omitting facts that support an opposing view. For example, they will report that blacks are disproportionately shot by police, but they will not report that blacks commit a disproportionate amount of violent crime. Right? So if you only get the statistics on, what percentage of people being shot by police are black, and you compare those to the percentage of blacks in the population, you might think, wow, look at this terrible racism. Blacks are just being murdered by the police. But if you look at the rate at which blacks commit violent crimes, you'll find, blacks commit a disproportionate amount of violent crime. A long time ago, I did a video on this. On a specific NPR article, and I showed how they lied by omission, by omitting the statistics on the percentage of violent crime that was committed by blacks and Hispanics in New York City. They just showed the percentages of blacks and Hispanics that were victims of police violence. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I'll link to it. And the percentage of blacks and Hispanics in the New York City population, and they just completely left out the graph that showed the rates at which blacks and Hispanics commit violent crime. And there was no excuse for doing this because all three of those charts were actually present in the report of the New York City Police Department that they used to do the article, but they just cherry-picked two charts, put them next to each other, and implied, this is all you need to know. Look here, racism. Okay, so that's how they can lie, by selecting facts or statistics and omitting others. So you get an incomplete picture, and you are led to a conclusion that is false. Okay, the next method is selecting images. They will show you images of an event that support one view while omitting images that support an opposing view. A great example of this is how the media suddenly forget the taboo on showing you dead bodies when they want to elicit sympathy for something. Like the Elaine Kurdi the little boy that drowned on the beach in Turkey, I guess it was. You know, little Syrian boy who drowned, or the little girl who drowned recently crossing the Rio Grande, or is it the Rio Grande? I don't know. Right? So they'll suddenly decide, oh, it's okay to show a dead body now, but it's not okay to show you dead bodies of people killed by Muslim terrorists, right? Another example would be going to a refugee camp and finding the women and children, you know, the 3 children in the camp, and ignoring the hundreds of men, right? So taking a picture of women and children who are actually refugees, but not taking a picture of men, or taking a picture that disproportionately represents women and children to give you the impression that the refugees are women and children, and to elicit sympathy, right? Because we feel more empathy, more natural empathy for women, and especially for children, right? So you have these sad little children, but that isn't, the majority of people in the camp, so that's misleading. Another example would be if they have a feel-good story, like let's say it's about parenting. Like, let's say they have a feel-good story about fathers. Guess what stock photos they will use to illustrate that story? Well, we all know they'll use photos of black men, right? They'll use photos of a black man with his child, maybe his biracial child, you know, taking him for a walk in the park or something. Whereas if there's a scary story, like a feel-bad story about something like, I don't know, violence against women, you know, they'll use a stock photo of a scary white man. So they will select images to reinforce a narrative, to reinforce a view of the world. And this view of the world has nothing to do with reality. It's all about ideology. You know, it's much less likely that you're going to see a black man with his kid than a white man with his kid, right? They look at the statistics on single parenthood, and you know, they're pretty bad for blacks, especially for biracial children. But you know, they're trying to make you believe that the world is a certain way, and they're trying to make you feel a certain way about things, you know, to have certain emotional reactions, to be more scared of white men, and feel more positively toward black men, you know, view them as positive. And they feel that they're justified in doing this because they believe that they're fighting oppression, right? That manipulating your view of the world is necessary to fight against harmful stereotypes. Now, they have been taught that this is acceptable and this is good and this is what they should do, but it is a form of lying. You know, all this is all about deception. Okay, another way that they'll deceive you is with the verbiage that they use in a headline. Headlines are concise, right? And they create a frame of interpretation. So the first thing you see, well, these days it's often an image, but it used to be that the first thing you would see is the headline. And it's still a very important part of a story because it communicates the gist of the story, the basic idea. It creates a frame of interpretation through which you view the rest of the story. And a lot of people don't even read the story. They just read the headline, maybe they skim a few lines, they never get to the bottom of the story, you know. So a misleading headline can be very effective in framing an event, right? Like with this Jussie Smollett thing, they have hate crime, right? They have the name Jussie Smollett, they have attacked and possible hate crime. With the Portland event, it says 3 arrested and 8 injured as Portland protests turn violent. So they don't talk about people being attacked. They talk about things just happening. You know, it's all in passive voice. And the protests just turned violent, right? It's not like a bunch of violent people went with intent to commit violence and committed violence by attacking people, which is what actually happened. They framed it as, oh, it's just something that happened when people were protesting. There was just, you know, somehow things got out of hand, but, you know, whatever, right? You know, it's a lie. You know, but it's not a direct lie. I mean, you could say that this is a description of what happened. It's just not a very accurate description. It's not necessarily false, right? You couldn't sue them for being completely false, but it's deceptive. It's misleading, right? Nobody who watched the videos of what happened would ever describe it in that way if they were trying to be honest. Okay, so that's just another example of how they lie. Okay, selective phrasing is another one, and this is similar to, obviously, to selecting headlines, but it's done throughout the article, right? I think I've already covered this, but I'll give one example of how the use of terms can be very selective and misleading. When they approve of an election result, it is democracy. When they disapprove of an election result, it is populism. So if a political party appeals to the public enough to get elected, but the media doesn't approve of their positions, they will say it's populism, right? Another example would be labeling criticism on social media as abuse or trolling. Like they will say that these people are trolls rather than that they are critics, that they are, or just voicing their opinions, right? So somebody who puts, like say, crime statistics underneath a CNN article would be a troll, right? Is that an accurate use of the word troll? Well, we're just lumping a bunch of people in together. Some people must be trolls. They can find some examples. So then they'll lump everybody in under that category and dismiss them all as trolls, right? And of course, if, a woman of color is insulted on Twitter, that's abuse or harassment. But if Trump is, depicted as being decapitated and held, his bloody head is being held up or something, well, that's just political commentary. That's art. That's something else, right? So by using different terms, you can have a big impact on the way that information is presented and the way people interpret it. Because words have denotations and connotations, and language is not precise, right? So they can get away with lying by just, using language or using vague terms and expanding their definition so that, well, it does include some people who fit under that category. Like there will be some trolls insulting people on Twitter, but they will lump everyone who is critical into that category and dismiss their criticisms because some people were, using the N-word. Okay, another method is selective editing, where they do an interview or they take a speech that somebody gave or whatever, and they edit out little chunks, which they then present to you as, look what this person said. Without giving you the full context, right? Without giving you the whole speech or the whole interview. They will cut out little chunks and present it to you as if, well, here you go. Look at what this person said, right? This is all you need to know now. You understand this person. There was an example where they did this to Roger Scruton. He said that the Chinese government was turning their citizens into carbon copies, because they were kind of thought policing them and stuff like that. And this was very scary. And they edited what he said to make it seem like he was saying that Chinese people are carbon copies of each other. And it's scary, right? So they edited it to make him look like he was a racist, like an evil racist, because he has wrongthink. He has opinions they don't like, right? They might consider him to be a racist for his actual opinions, but they know that the public would not necessarily view it that way. So instead, they mislead the public by editing what he said to make it appear like he was saying Chinese people are, mindless drones or clones of each other or whatever. This trick is getting harder to pull off because people can record interviews now and post them to social media so you can hear what they actually said, and this is exposing a lot of fraud. But they don't seem to have learned this. They still do it. They still do it. So I guess it still works, but this is one of the reasons why the media are losing credibility. All of these things are becoming easier to expose because of social media and the ubiquity of smartphones and stuff like that. All right, the next one is selecting perspectives. They will selectively report on the people affected by an event. They might go out and look for people of a certain kind to interview, or they will interview random people like at the location that an event occurs or on the street or whatever. but then select the perspectives that they want to present to the public, right? So they will interview a bunch of people, but then only allow you to hear the people whose beliefs fit the narrative. So, for example, after a Muslim terrorist attack, they will go and interview Muslims and say, are you concerned about a backlash? How has this event impacted your life? Like you didn't lose any relatives, your child didn't die, but we want to hear your story. Are you worried now that you'll be discriminated against? Whereas if there's a white nationalist terrorist attack, it's not like they're going to go talk to white nationalists and say, are you concerned that this will impact the way people perceive you? Are you worried about a backlash? Are you worried about censorship now? They'll never do that, of course, right? They'll go to the relatives and they'll show the grieving widows and so on and so forth. So they're trying to get you to identify with one side or another, right? They're trying to humanize one side, dehumanize another. And when you see the world through a certain perspective, then you tend to identify with that perspective. So if they show you the world from the perspective of the poor Muslims who are concerned about a backlash, you'll identify with them and you'll say, oh yeah, I understand that. They're worried about, being persecuted because of what these extremists did. And they're not extremists. They're nice people, right? Whereas if it's somebody they don't want to humanize, they want to demonize, they'll just show you the worst side of them. And they won't give you their perspective. And a good example of this is how they completely erased the perspective of the Christchurch shooter. They completely erased his concerns. They don't want you to understand his perspective. They don't want you to see the world through his eyes, right? They want you to see it through the eyes of somebody affected by his actions. And of course, I'm not saying I agree with his beliefs or support what he did, but I'm saying that to understand what he did, you have to understand his perspective. But that might humanize him, and that might make you think, oh, well, maybe he has some correct views, even if I don't fully agree with him. Maybe he's got a point here and there, right? They don't want you to do that. They don't want you to see the world from his perspective. So this is very powerful, and they do this a lot. And it's very subtle. You're not really aware of it, right? Although, again, all of these things are sort of becoming exposed. All of these things are gradually being exposed because of social media. Because people can point them out. More and more people are becoming aware of them. More and more people are becoming aware of the huge discrepancy between the view of the world presented by the establishment media and reality. Right? That those things are very, very different. Okay, they will select experts. And this is another one that they do a lot. They will get a person with the right beliefs to come on as an expert and present his opinions as if they were established facts, right? So this is a way that they can lie to you without taking responsibility for what they're saying. They'll just get somebody else to lie to you, and they'll call him an expert. And if somebody questions his expertise later, they can just say, well, he was the best expert we had available. So by selecting some people and putting them in front of you as experts and excluding others, they can shape your understanding of things, right? Because you only get one interpretation. Or maybe you get two interpretations, but they exclude other interpretations or other ways of seeing things. So, you get the impression that, well, there is this debate going on, but these are the options. I can be on this side or that side. There's no other option. This is often done with advocacy research. There is a lot of shit published in the academy that is not research, it is advocacy masquerading as research. But it's got the credibility that's associated with the academy because it's, from some professor. So they'll get the professor or they'll just get the research and they'll report on it. And then they expect you to just say, oh, well, it must be true. If a professor says there are, an infinite number of genders, I guess it's true, right? I mean, it's a professor. I'm supposed to believe the professor. But then sometimes they'll just get people who are just self-proclaimed experts that they happen to agree with. Like, they'll get Anita Sarkeesian and call her an expert on video games or, internet harassment or something like that. I mean, she's just a self-proclaimed expert, but they'll treat her like an expert. What do these people really know that you don't? Like what special knowledge does somebody like, what's that girl? Laurie Penny. What special knowledge does Laurie Penny have that she should appear on BBC giving her opinion? What knowledge does Laurie Penny have? What expertise does she have? Let me just look up Laurie Penny, just for fun. I mean, she's a fucking retard, but let's just find out what her background is. She's got to have a Wikipedia entry. There you go. She did not age well, I gotta say. She looks sort of hideous now. She was kind of cute as a younger punk kind of girl. So she is, she's a rich kid, blah, blah, blah. We all know that. She studied English at Oxford, and she got a journalism training certificate. And she's been blogging since 2007. So her claim to fame is that she's a blogger and that she has a journalism certificate, which is, basically nothing. And so really her only claim to being an expert is that people listen to her, that she's a blogger and that the BBC has brought her on before. And so this justifies them bringing her on again, right? It's like a self-justifying thing. Once you bring somebody on, they become an expert. If you interview them 5 times, they're the standard expert who talks about gender issues. We'll bring on Laurie Penny because this is what she does. She's an expert on this stuff. The media create experts and then use them to deliver their message. And the funny thing is, once this gets going, like the thing is, Wikipedia treats, serious journalism as credible sources, right? Like establishment media is treated as a credible source by Wikipedia and by other establishment media. So once a lie gets going in the establishment media, it becomes self-reinforced. I don't know how many people I have talked to who believe the 1 in 5 rape statistic, which is this bogus notion that was repeated over and over in the media by politicians, by people on the street, and they all believed it because they had heard it somewhere. And, it seemed just counterintuitive enough to be true. Like, 1 in 5 women on a college campus get raped. There's a lot of stuff like that where the media act as a kind of circular definition of truth. Like it's true if we say it's true and we report on what is true. They also select criticism. They suppress criticisms that they don't like, and they elevate criticisms that they like. They criticize some people to death, right? Like Trump, right? Everything Trump says goes under a fucking microscope, is analyzed. Every possible deviation from the truth is reported on extensively. They go on and on and on about Trump. They try to dig up dirt on Trump, etc., etc. If Trump tweets an incorrect statistic, there will be an article on it in a whole bunch of different outlets. Now, did they do this with Obama? Did they try to dig up dirt on Obama? Did they relentlessly criticize Obama? I remember he propagated the 1 in 5 rape statistic. Did anybody question that? Was there an article on, oh, look, Obama's propagating false statistics. He's misleading the public. Obama's lies, look at all the lies Obama told this week, yada, yada, yada. No, there was nothing like there was for Trump, right? With Trump, they have relentlessly criticized him, and they have given a lot of prominence to critics of Trump in a way that they have obviously not done for other presidents. Another one is selective importance. Deciding what is important. Deciding what you need to know, right? Like that Portland thing wasn't on CNN's front page. I had to search for it. I'm pretty sure the Jussie Smollett thing was on their front page, right? When it happened. I'm sure it was like the headline news or whatever. Any hate crime against blacks or gays will be over-reported, even if it's a hoax. Black hate crimes against whites are just ignored. The media shuffles them into the back pages. And they often go looking for a certain kind of story, right? Like the Rolling Stone rape story was an example of that. The fake rape story. They went looking for rape on a college campus, and they had a preconceived notion of what they wanted to find, and they found some crazy girl who was willing to go along with their narrative, and they ran with it, and they had this complete hoax. Claimed that a girl was raped at a frat party, and she was thrown through a glass table, and all this shit, right? And it obviously was a hoax, and they ran with it. They put it in the Rolling Stone and, discredited themselves. So, why is that one event important? Why would that, even if it were true, why would it be important? Why would one girl getting raped be so important compared to all the other women who got raped that day in the United States, or that month, or that year? Why that story? Well, because it fit their narrative, right? You want to find rich white guys behaving badly, right? You want to find a stereotypical example of something that fits your preconceived moral narrative of the evil white man using his power and privilege to abuse some, innocent minority or innocent woman or whatever. Okay, another thing they do is selective memory, where they just forget stuff. It's just like, oh, that didn't happen. Or maybe it did, but, well, it's not important now. Things that they view as important because they fit the narrative are commemorated. They'll bring it up over and over again. Steve Saylor has talked about the number of times that the New York Times talked about Emmett Till, this murder that happened back in, I think in Alabama back in the 60s. Maybe it was the 50s. I don't know. It was some racially charged murder. But they report on this over and over and over and over, right? Why? Why is it so important? It's one murder, right? Why is that more important than some, white girl getting raped and murdered by a black guy? Or what about that girl in, I think it was it Arkansas? Girl who had gasoline poured down her throat and set on fire and stuff. Why didn't they report more on that? Or, the retarded kid that got tortured by blacks. Things that fit the narrative get remembered. Things that don't get forgotten. Okay, another one is selecting a value frame. They will report on facts through a normative filter. For example, they typically report on asset prices going up as good and going down as bad. So if the stock market goes up, that's good. And if the stock market goes down, that's bad. If house prices go up, that's good. If house prices go down, that's bad. Now, this is nonsense. I mean, from whose perspective are these things good or bad? House prices going up is not good if you want to buy a house. It's bad. It may be good if you own a house and you want to sell and downsize, or fund your retirement with a reverse mortgage or something. But if you're young and you want to buy a house, it's bad, right? Same thing with stocks. Stocks going up doesn't make us wealthier. It's not good per se. It might be good if you own stocks, but it's bad if you don't and you want to buy stocks. The media do this all the time, right? They'll present things through a normative filter. Let's say men are more represented in STEM fields than women. I'm not even sure that's true, but let's just say that were true. They would put that through a normative filter and say, look at this problem. Women are underrepresented in STEM, right? That they would never say, oh my gosh, look, men are underrepresented in elementary school education. Or, look, this neighborhood has very few white people, right? They would never present that in a negative way, but they would always say, look at this neighborhood, it's too white. It's this city, look how white it is, right? And then they have a spin on it that's normative, so you're conditioned to think of that as bad, and the opposite is good, right? So you get conditioned to view certain things as good and other things as bad, even though they might not really be bad for you or good for you. You just start to assume that, oh, that's just good and that's just bad. Another kind of framing device is selecting a moral frame. Let's take the example of illegal immigration. You could frame illegal immigration as a problem of helping the weak and the poor, right? You can frame it as an issue of care and concern, or you can frame it as an issue of lawlessness and danger, as an invasion, right? Or a crime. These are different ways of viewing the same event. You can view it as, oh, look, there's a problem. There's a crisis. They need help. These poor people showing up at the border, they need our help. Or you can frame it as an invasion. They're invading our country. They're undermining our society. Or you could just frame it as a crime. Like, well, they're breaking the law and, they may not be destroying our society or acting like a foreign power invading us, but they're still breaking the law. And so they should be kicked out, right? So depending on which frame you apply, you're going to have different moral intuitions. And, even the words they use will help to create the frame. So if they say illegal alien, then they're focusing on the crime, right? When they say undocumented migrant, they're presenting it as, oh, well, this poor person they lost their documents or something, right? They just don't have documents, but they're a human and they need our help, right? Or they call them refugees. If you call somebody a refugee, it implies they need help. They're fleeing from something. But that's not the same as an economic migrant, right? So were all the people going into Europe, are the people crossing the Mediterranean refugees or migrants? Are the people crossing the U.S. border illegally refugees or economic migrants? Those are different ways of seeing the same thing. And neither one is precisely definable, so you can kind of choose which one to apply. But when you do that, you create a different moral frame. And this is a very powerful way of shaping public opinion. Okay, another framing device is selecting a social issue frame. This one's a little more complicated. This is interpreting an event as being relevant to a larger social issue. And the most obvious example of this is something like the fact that when there's a white supremacist terrorist attack, they will present this as part of a bigger problem of right-wing hate, the rise of hate. And, they'll lump everybody in, like they'll attach Trump to it, the Republican Party, like they'll make it as big as possible. It's this big social problem of hate and white supremacy and evil, yada, 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 right? When a Muslim goes into, like a gay bar and massacres 50 people or whatever, this is not linked to the threat of Islam or Islamic fundamentalism or even Islamic terrorism. They just fail to make this link to a larger social issue. So they'll report on it, but they report on it as, well, it's just something that happened, right? They don't report on it as, oh my gosh, look at this rise of Islamic extremism and the danger it poses, right? Because that would be racist. Right? So it's not racist to say, look at the scary white supremacists, but it's racist to say, look at the scary Muslim terrorists. So anyway, they do that a lot. They select a way to see it, which can be broad or narrow, and it can include, it can be viewed as belonging to a category. Like, this belongs in the category of isolated incidents, or this belongs in the social issue category of gun control, and this one belongs in the social issue category of, the danger of white supremacy, right? Okay, and finally, the media, the establishment media will create social issues out of nothing, like out of their own, asses, basically. A great example of this is the missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada. This is not a real social issue. This is a manufactured issue. And I did a video on the statistics of this, right? It's true that Native women are more likely to be murdered than non-Native women. But as I pointed out, they're also more likely to be murderers. In fact, they're more likely to be accused of homicide than to be victims of homicide. And Native men are 3 times more likely than Native women to be murdered. And also Natives are generally more likely to commit murder than non-Natives. And a lot of Native women are being killed by Native men, and so on and so forth. So there might be a social issue which is Native people commit a lot of violence, right? Like, that's the more natural issue. If you were looking at this in a non-biased way, you would say, well, okay, the statistics show that Native people are committing a lot of violence, proportional to the rest of the population. But they chose to focus on women, and they focused on it in a certain way that implied that this was the fault of society, the fault of, an indifferent society that just doesn't care when Native women are murdered, right? So they put a certain spin on it. But more than that, they just created the issue. Like, missing and murdered Indigenous women is a media construct. The media constructed this issue that by reporting on it, by claiming that this was an issue, that this was a natural category, a natural problem, when really it was an ideological category. It's not a natural problem. And the same thing is true for Black Lives Matter. There isn't really a problem of Black people getting, shot by the police or abused by the police. There is a general issue of police brutality that applies to people of all races. This issue has always been there. Historically, there has always been some level of corruption and abuse of power by the police. This is not a new thing, and this is not something specific to blacks. But Black Lives Matter pretended that this was about racism, right? Even though there is no evidence that the problem of police brutality is connected to racism, just as there is no evidence that missing and murdered Indigenous women has anything to do with racism, but they presented it as if it did, right? And so that's how the media create social issues. They just define them. They just say, this is an issue. Black Lives Matter. Black people being killed by the police is a social issue. Why? Because it fits our ideology. Missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's got great intersectionality power. Missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's designed to fit left-wing ideology because it's intersectional, right? But it's not designed to fit reality. It's not a natural, real problem. Okay, I think that covers it. At least I've gone through my list. If you can think of any others, let me know. And as always, thanks for listening.